Okay, I think we're live. This is Gathering 208, the podcast, episode 20 already.
20.
That means we've been in quarantine for 20 weeks.
20 weeks.
Yeah.
Friends, 20 weeks.
I mean, I don't know if we can even call it quarantine anymore. I think it's just like reality.
Yeah, we've been in life now for 20 weeks.
Yeah. It's new and different and great. So tonight we have Celene Olsen with us. Celene lives in Sioux Falls, and she is kind of part of our team. I feel like I'm leaning really far forward. She's part of our team here at Gathering 208, helping us out with some of our digital marketing and just kind of being another good set of ears that knows, how the world works. And we're so excited to have you on tonight, Celene.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be on.
Cool. So as we had decided to have this conversation with you tonight, it kind of morphed from a let's get to know Celene to, us kind of talking a little more about just kind of our pasts and knowing each other, because you and I have known each other for, 5 years?
Yeah, I thought so.
5 years, probably. Yeah, we met in Mitchell, Wesleyan and Mitchell, South Dakota.
Oh, that's where you guys met.
Yeah.
I never knew where you guys met.
That's
I just
so
knew
funny.
you were friends.
Yeah. So Celene and her husband Derek have been friends with us for 5 years. Derek was on a worship team with us, and then they moved to Sioux Falls, and we moved to Sioux Falls. So we got to hang out a bit more there.
Okay.
So yeah,
that makes more sense.
Yeah, and throughout our relationship, we have that kind of relationship where we can be kind of honest and open with each other, and we realized that something that we could talk about tonight was mental health.
Yes.
Getting help mainly, but how it's okay to not be okay sometimes, and how it's okay to admit that.
Yes, exactly it. Yeah, it's crazy how it morphed into that, but I think it's been on a topic that's been kind of a priority for me for a while, and then with just the quarantine, you're seeing a lot of those things crop up as well for other people. Just because it's such a jarring experience. It's kind of a trauma in itself as well, just to go from something that was normal to something that is a new normal, and rebelling and grieving what once was, and wondering if you'll ever have that again, or what it will look like in the future.
Exactly.
Well, and I think it just depends on, I think it affects everybody differently, but depending on how you lived your life before COVID happened, I think it is going to affect some people harder. Like, personally, I've been struggling during this. I'm an extrovert. I need people. I need face-to-face interaction. I need that in order to be in a good place. And it recharges me. It refreshes me. And yeah, that came suddenly crashing down for me, and it's been difficult.
Yeah.
But
you and I got to a point where 3-4 weeks in, we're like, we just need to see each other. So I drove over to the parking lot near Kathy's house, and we set up 2 lawn chairs 6 feet apart.
Yep.
And we just talked
sat
for a
there
while.
and hung out for a little bit.
Oh,
it's the way to go. I watched a lot of people adapt. Like, you'd see them in the parking lots on the weekends, in the schools, just hanging out in their, the trunk of their vehicles and chatting with each other. And I think there were some that, met at parks, that weren't quarantined off, just to have conversation as well.
Yeah, my family even started off, this is months ago now, but my cousins, my aunt, my mom, my sister, we all started doing occasional Zoom calls like this just to catch up, and they'd all have a glass of wine and we'd just talk for an hour. It's just,
there you go.
You think about what's important, and you prioritize kind of those relationships when you think about the fact that, you can't really take anything for granted.
Yes. I fully agree.
So you guys have had a bit of a different experience in Sioux Falls with COVID and quarantine, and South Dakota not exactly being shut down.
No.
Yes.
How has that taken a toll on you and your family mentally, just knowing that, you still have to be wary of these things, but there's a lot of people around that aren't necessarily adhering to any kind of precautions.
It's a challenge. For us, it was important to kind of keep it, close. Like we see the people that we see on a consistent basis, and we don't see a whole lot of like crazy new people. And when I'm usually the person that will go out of the house most of the time. Like we don't really take the kids out anywhere. We finally took them out like once. It was like a couple of weeks ago, wearing masks, getting them adjusted to that because we weren't sure yet what the school system was going to do here.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that they're excited about their masks, but
that's good.
That's good because I think our kids are over them.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
We've had a mask mandate like what, all summer?
Yeah, since beginning of June, I think. Yeah.
Our kid, my girls especially, like my son, he's 14, so he's cool. He gets it. But my 7-year-old and my 5-year-old are like,
I want to play. I love it. All right, so let's kind of start wherever it's best for you to start, but how have you approached this mental health journey that you've been on? What kind of made you realize that it was something that you needed to address?
It's interesting because it's been gradual and then it was abrupt. I knew I possibly needed that help after I had miscarriages. So when I was fairly young, my family is born and raised Catholic, and so reproduction wasn't an issue for a lot of them, at least from what I've heard and what I experienced. So when we conceived and when we tried to have kids, we ended up having miscarriages, and that was incredibly hard for me to deal with. And then realizing that, I have like PCOS and that's never discussed. And so a lot of that took a mental toll on me. And right around that time, my dad ended up having a stroke due to his disregard of taking care of himself. He was diabetic. He suffered a stroke, and I thought, oh my gosh, he might be dying because his kidney levels were out of control. They had a really hard time getting them to level out. And my mom was like, I don't know what's going to happen. But he ended up living for another 5 years, but it wasn't without its issues. But it's right around that time that happened. And then I got incredibly sick and lost a ton of weight. And it was probably a lot to do to stress and anxiety, but I got tested for everything. Found out that my gallbladder was borderline functioning, which all of that just made me really depressed because it took me out of work. It made me feel like I was failing because all of a sudden, I'm fairly newly married and all of these issues are sprouting up and I've never had those. And I had terrible anxiety as a kid, didn't realize I did. I just thought whatever I was experiencing was, I just sucked it up. But everything was gradual. There'd be moments where I'm like, man, maybe I do, but I'm not that bad because unfortunately there's this ideology back when I was growing up. Mental illness wasn't discussed. And what was discussed was like, you need to get help if you're like suicidal. So it was like, that was it. And I'm like, well, I don't feel that way. I just have this anxiety. And so I just kept living with it for a number of years, just like off and on, having these spikes, but being able to like put them back into control because I built up these weird coping mechanisms to compartmentalize the anxiety and the depression and just like dealt with it. Yeah. And then after my brother was killed and just all of that pressure of dealing with like courts and attorneys and then dealing with, my sister-in-law being in recovery and my family already being spliced apart as it was due to, my dad's death. it was just enough where I was like crying all the time. My husband was concerned. He'd be like, I don't know what to do for you. Like, what do you want me to do? I'm like, I don't know. If I knew what to do, I would have done it myself. Yeah. It was just realizing I couldn't compartmentalize anything anymore. And that terrified me because I could see myself unraveling. And for me, control is everything. And to not be able to be in control of my emotions and be in control of how I'm responding to things was incredibly terrifying. I'm like, oh my gosh, what the heck is going on? So I started doing research. I dug into family history. I asked questions. And found out that there's a lot of mental illness on both sides of the family. And I decided, okay, I need to get some help. And I went and saw a doctor, and it was really nerve-wracking to tell her, like, I think I need to see a therapist. Like, I didn't know where to go. I was just like, I'm going to start at a doctor and go from there. And they got me to a therapist that was in-house, and that was a really great first step. It was an incredibly great first step to meet my therapist and find somebody that's really great. And they were incredibly gentle and really informative, and was like, this is what I do. This is, you want to make sure you find a really good therapist that's going to connect with you and is going to be able to help you. And I just stuck with the one that I was referred to, because it was like, we get along like great. This person's awesome. But when they prescribed me anxiety medication, she's like, I think this would be beneficial. I was incredibly terrified to take it. Like I went like a week of just looking at the pills and being like, I don't know. I'm terrified. What's going to happen?
It's a big step. I mean, that's relinquishing your control,
Yes. And it was right before we were supposed to go for court for my brother, and it's like, well, I better start. So yeah, I took them like that whole week that I was gone, and ever since then, haven't looked back. Like, it's totally different experience.
It is a huge step to take, and I mean, we've talked a bit about this, but I have kind of a similar story to you, where I grew up with anxiety and depression, and I even dealt with issues of self-harm really for a number of years, up until probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And it was something where, I'd be like, I need to talk to somebody about it. Oh, I'll talk to my sister and see what she thinks. And we're like, well, don't do that anymore. But like, what is she gonna do about it? Because she doesn't have the ability to advocate for me. So it really took until I was older, and realizing that there was an issue that was kind of beyond my control with the anxiety and everything. We'll get into this more next week with the fertility talk. But after going through a long battle with endometriosis and chronic pain, and finally having a hysterectomy, I was still dealing with chronic pain, just in different ways in my body. And so I was physically in pain. I was mentally suffering a lot from anxiety and depression. And I went into a doctor because I was like, something's wrong with me. I don't know what it is. Maybe I have lupus, who knows? And they gave me this mental health questionnaire. And I sat there kind of filling it out, and Josh was actually sitting beside me, and he kind of looks over and he's like, are you going to be honest on that? I was like, what are you talking about? Of course I'm being honest on that. And he goes, no, go get a clean sheet and try it again. And so then I did. I filled it out. Properly, and talked to my doctor a little bit that day, and we decided that anxiety medication was a good way to go. It had the added benefit of this particular medication supposed to help with nerve pain, and kind of, after dealing with chronic pain for a good majority of your life, your nerves are still, used to being in pain. So they're still telling you that there's pain somewhere in your body. And you could ask my husband. I just became like a new person after that. You know, it finally seemed like I had some hope in life, motivation for things. And
pain is depressing, man.
It is. It's terrible. It's really terrible. So, you know, making that decision that you want to be better, you know, especially for yourself, but also for your family. You know, my kids deserved a mom that was present and, you know, dealing with things in a more proactive way. So, yeah, that there was that stigma in our younger years. You know, we're kind of all from that same generation where, you know, depression was maybe not talked about. You know, you always had your suicide assemblies and everything like that.
Yep.
But taking pills was just like, you know, there's always those horror stories of they made me worse.
Yeah.
And, you know, so-and-so took pills and then killed themselves.
Yeah.
Like, that's a little extreme, but...
Well, I think that's the thing, because it, you know, from the generation that we're all from, if it you know, obviously, like, if there was a suicide, it was known and it was discussed, and that was super extreme.
Yeah.
But nobody ever talked about leading up to that final point, you know, because if you did talk about it, it was shameful. You were labeled as crazy
or selfish.
Yeah, exactly. Like it wasn't, there was never a conversation, at least that I was ever a part of. There was never a conversation that revolved around, you know, any type of mental illness that was handled with grace and forgiveness and understanding and empathy. It was just very like, oh, you crazy, you know, like it just, so I mean, I totally understand why people never wanted to talk about it, you know, because why would you? Why would you want to get labeled as crazy? You know, you don't want to.
No, you don't. And it's also recognizing the signs, because it's really easy to disprove what you feel, because you're like, oh, well, I think it could be worse. So maybe it's not that bad. Like for me, I just thought I wasn't that bad. If I was going to go to the doctor and then be like, okay, just try some of these exercises and then it should be fine. Like I was really worried that I was going to be labeled as being like over dramatic or not taken seriously, which wasn't the case, thankfully.
That is good.
But, you know, that was something I had growing up. Like when I would have these issues, I would just assume, oh, it could be worse. You know, what I have is not that bad.
Yeah. When you see other people suffering, you don't want to make it seem like you're, I guess, making it seem like it's any, you know, your life is any worse or anything for that. You don't want to make their plight seem lesser by admitting that you have something, or make yourself seem like a hypochondriac. That's how I always felt growing up, especially before being diagnosed with endometriosis. You know, I was at the doctor a lot because I had stomach pain and I was sick a lot, and they're just like, there's nothing wrong with you, you're fine. So growing up with that, having doctors constantly tell me there's nothing wrong with you, you're fine, I always felt like, well, obviously, you know, it's all in my head.
Totally.
Yeah.
I had that growing up too. I didn't realize up until, oh gosh, I don't know, not even 10 years ago, that I have a connective joint disorder. I didn't realize that I had that growing up. And so, you know, I've always had chronic pain forever. Like I've never not had a day where something doesn't hurt, but I just thought that was normal. But with that joint disorder, like I'm clumsy and I'm totally accident prone. So growing up, I was always hurt, you know, like a sprained ankle, a sprained wrist, tendonitis. Like I was the kid wearing the knee braces and stuff like that. And so everybody labeled me as like, she's a hypochondriac. And I didn't know any better, because I didn't realize that this was actually stemming from a legitimate health issue, you know? So yeah, you do. If there's ever anything that you have that's chronic pain related, because it's not of like people can't see your pain, you know, you look fine.
Yeah.
So when those symptoms come out, you look like you're crazy.
Exactly.
You know?
Right.
But you're not.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and even it's funny this should come around because we literally are going to talk about fertility next week, but the two of you having PCOS and me having endometriosis, that's also something that can feel very isolating, especially like you said, Celene, with you coming from a good Catholic family, you know, nobody seemed to have any issues reproducing or anything like that. And so when you get to that point where you're struggling, and I mean, miscarriage in itself can be very isolating and very painful, but then finding out that you have this condition that makes it all the harder, that can really trigger a lot of feelings.
It did, and it does. Like, it still does. I mean, PCOS, I'm like always, like, I can always tell if it's being, like, if there's a flare up. So I'm always worried about my food intake on top of having the gallbladder issues as well. It's also knowing, like, oh, food can also create more chaos for your PCOS. And with, I have a long line of like family that have a lot of health issues. Like my dad alone could like fill a whole page of, like, when I go in and check, it's like, who is this? Like, dad. And that always makes me fearful as well. Probably makes me anxious, more than likely. Makes me anxious as well, just knowing those things exist, and that, you know, I have to be watching out for that. But the PCOS definitely is not great.
Absolutely.
And it's so unique to everybody. Like, everybody has some similar issues and some not similar issues, but nobody talks about it because it's like not a whole lot of people talk about it, because it's, you know,
it's
the reproductive area.
Right.
It's a lady issue.
Exactly.
Nobody wants to talk about, like, I have like really painful periods that are horrible.
Exactly. Right.
I used to, you know, when I would lead youth group, girls, small groups, I'd be like, here's the thing. You can plug your ears while I tell you about this part of my story all you want, but you all have a uterus too. And if you do come upon a day where you're having problems or anything like this, I am here for you, and I will advocate for you no matter what, because it's important to talk about.
Yes. Yeah. Like I'm at the point now where I'd rather just have open conversations and make people feel uncomfortable, because it's like, we're trying to remove the stigma, like mental health. Like, I'm not afraid to talk to people and be like, yep, I have therapy. Yep, I take, you know, medication. It's not something to shy away from or to feel shame about, which, I mean, has been talked about. I mean, there is a movement that's going on to reduce the stigma of that, but it still exists, because there's not a whole lot that's been talked about. And so it's like, I don't understand how this can help you. Like, how does therapy actually help you? You're just talking to somebody, essentially. It's like, well, it's more than that.
Right.
Well, there's still a generation of people and a mentality of people that, you know, would be like, oh, you snowflakes, you know, get over it, buck up. So kind of bringing this around, when it comes to dealing with this depression, anxiety, you know, it's really awesome getting therapy and getting help. How has this affected your faith? Because I know I personally will get into it a little bit, but I just kind of want to hear from you and how that's worked for you.
For my faith, that's a good question.
And it's okay if you're still working through it.
Yeah, I'm still working through it, just because there's other circumstances that are surrounding where my faith is at. But for me, it's a little bit more eye-opening to realize where I'm at in life, and realize that my faith was built off of my anxiety. So I was always like, I feel the only way I have worth is by contributing. And if I don't contribute anything in the church, then I should cease to be there. Like, it's
are you an
all-encompassing.
Enneagram 2?
I have no idea.
We'll have to send her a book.
I'm a 2. You totally have to find out what your Enneagram is. It's so like, especially like with talking about like depression and anxiety, and like the Enneagram, it helps you understand all these different facets of who you are and why you are the way you are and why you react the way you do. Mm-hmm. It has been so eye-opening for me, where I'm just like, oh, okay. So that's why I'm like that. And that's why I have those feelings and emotions. And this is what I can do to work with them in a positive way. This is when I'm like, oh, kind of getting some red flags. Like, this is the kind of unhealthy, not good zone, you know? Super, super fascinating. Not supposed to tell people what they are, but based on what you just said, I'm wondering if we're the same.
Yeah, that was just like, that was a recent discovery. That was like within this week, like trying to dissect things through already dissecting things and coming up to be like, oh, because of my trauma in the past, I've always been trying to obtain acceptance through what I can do, not through who I am as a person. So that's still a process, because for me it's very foreign, because I've always operated as like, as long as I can contribute, like people will remember me, people will notice me, like there's a reason, you know, they'll have a reason to like stick around.
Right.
Yeah.
But if I don't, then like, what's the point? Like, even I wouldn't want to, like,
right. Like, what are you good for if you don't do that?
Yeah.
Right. Well, and that comes from trauma.
Yeah. Well, and I also see that as a difference between like, what can you do for your faith versus what can your faith do for you? Because so often people focus on, you know, if I go to church and I volunteer for this food pantry, or I do this and this, I'm going to look good to other people, I'm going to look good to God, and then I'll check off that box and I'm going to heaven, it's all good. Versus, I am struggling, I'm having a very hard time, I need to lean into my faith and, you know, find comfort in that. That's a hard bridge to cross. Because for myself, the times that I have dealt most with any kinds of doubt in my faith, or struggles with, you know, even who is God, do I believe in God, was after my cousin died. She and I were pretty close. Well, we were close in age, and we'd, you know, grown up together, and she was killed in kind of a horrible accident. And that was the point where I was just like, why am I working so hard for the church when it doesn't make me feel better? It makes me feel worse. It makes me feel guilty. You know, there weren't exactly people reaching out to me during that time from the church, because we were kind of at this weird college age and just volunteering at a church while Josh was in school. So that was the point where I straight up quit going to church for like 4 or 5 months, and just was kind of over it. And it really took a little bit of introspection and kind of getting back into the Word and feeling like I could talk to somebody about it, about my feelings, and about, you know, how, like, I was mad at God, and I was like, why did this happen? Why do I feel this way? My anxiety got a lot worse. I didn't even really want to leave the house, all while I was just coming to terms with my health issues as well, because I'd just been diagnosed with endometriosis.
Sure.
I was struggling with kidney stones and all this other stuff. You know, first couple years of marriage, girl, they can be rough.
They can be rough. They can be rough. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's so easy too for believers, that, you know, that idea and that thought process that if you are the good Christian and you help out at church, you go to church, you read your Bible, you pray, you know, that if you do all of those things, almost like, you know, some people see God as like a genie, like if you do all the right things, then life is going to be good and
nothing
happy.
will go bad.
Nothing will go wrong. Nothing will, you know, bad will happen. But then what happens when it does? I think it's so rattling for people that it makes them really question if their faith was true and legit when it really was. You know, they just had a skewed maybe thought process of what that true faith will make their life end up like.
Right.
And that saying, you know, everything happens for a reason, I think is a bunch of crap. I really do. Like, I hate that saying.
And that God will never give you more than you can handle.
Yeah, he will.
He will.
He will. My cuppeth runneth over. Like,
yes. And like nobody was built to
handle it on their own.
All of that on their own.
And when you look at, I mean, there's a lot of beautiful, wonderful things in the world, but there is a lot of devastation and destruction and heartache and sin and ugliness. You know, God didn't cause that for a reason. No. You know, so I think if you have that thought process of, you know, everything happens for a reason, okay, then why did this super duper really terrible crappy thing happen? You know, like I don't understand where that thought developed from and how it infiltrated the Christian faith so much, because the reason that Jesus came was because we need him, because we can't do it on our own. We can't handle things on our own. We're supposed to take our heartaches and our failures and our weaknesses to him. So why then in the church did it get so much like, you can't talk about it, you can't discuss it, if you have those issues, there's something wrong with you, your faith's not legit, that's not right, you know?
I think it's because you can't answer those questions. You can't answer the whys.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, you genuinely can't. Like, why does this happen? Like, if God's so big and so massive, why is he allowing this? And I don't have an answer for it. Like, I still don't have an answer. I've asked that. For me, when my brother was killed, there was this really aggressive understanding for me anyways. Like, wow, the gap between like God and free will, like the space that he allows for free will is really vast. It's more than I realized.
Yeah.
And I realized just our human fragility. Like, wow. But I still don't have an answer for that, because then I'm like, okay, well then when does he intercede? Like, when does he, like, if he is a God of all of this, like, why, you know, when does he intercede? Does he have what he has? So those are a lot of questions that end up unraveling when you go through that.
Right. Well, and sometimes they end up unraveling years down the road, you know, like going through a terrible, crappy time makes zero sense. Sometimes it never makes sense, unfortunately, but sometimes you can look back and be like, oh, that was a super pivotal point in life, and it was trajectory to spur me into this direction, or spur me, like it created a passion that you didn't know existed, because if you never went through that pain, you never would have had that passion ignited, you know? And I know, like, personally for my life, there's definitely been some things that I've gone through that still don't make sense, and I really don't understand why. But on the flip side, there's even more that I've gone through that now looking back, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. I get the stepping stones of this led to this, and this led to this, and if this didn't happen, I wouldn't have never gotten here, you know?
And sometimes it's so far down the road that you come to that realization that it's like, why couldn't I have, you know, brought this all together sooner?
Right.
But then again, you know, it's all part of that process. You have to process things and come to terms with things as your mind and your body can handle them. So Celene, kind of a good lead into what you've been working on recently in therapy. You mentioned that you've recently started trauma therapy. What was kind of the pivot for you from traditional therapy to trauma therapy, and kind of what have you been realizing through this?
Yes. I transitioned into trauma therapy I started noticing that might be a possibility back in the beginning of 2020. I just ended up sitting down with some relatives of mine and having an open conversation about things that happened in my childhood. just because there's a lot of miscommunication with some of the traumas that have happened, the behaviors of some of my siblings, and just, not fully understanding the picture. And I was like, okay, all right, we're gonna lay this out. I'm kind of a confrontational person, and I'd rather just lay it out.
Yeah.
So that there's not this consistent like presumptions and assuming of things. So that was the first step of that. And then everything just kind of unraveled from there. And I guess a lot of trauma memories that were suppressed for so long just started cropping up when I was having conversations, as some of my family members started to deal with different aspects of their grief, either grieving with like how things came out with for my brother, to grieving all of a sudden about how they had felt in regards to my dad and when he died, and just the things in between there. And just watching some of my family get some help, some of them ignore wanting to actually get help and think like, no, that's not for me. It's like, oh, I think we should. Just realizing there were still those stigmas. Like they were okay with me getting help. They're not okay with them getting help. Like that, we already get help. I like, you know, we talked to so and so, and we talked to this person. Like, but they're not. There's a difference with a therapist.
Yeah.
But it's having to get to that point of being like, okay, it seems like such a taboo thing to be like, ooh, therapy and help and talking to somebody about this. But I just went to my therapist and told her what was going on, and she's like, okay, well, there's a thing called EMDR. You wanting to try? It's going to be really painful. And I'm like, let's do it. So I was like, I'm tired of living with these suppressed memories coming up and creating more issues for my anxiety, which then led me to talk to her about like, do I change my medication? Like this medication helped me for a while, but now I can't even get a hold again of myself, and what will this happen? And now I'm on my new dose of medication, and I recognize that it's like a privilege for me to be able to afford to do this, to go and do this, to get prescription, to see a therapist. And for me, it just opened up my eyes to being like, there's so many people that would benefit from this, but it's not always easily accessible, because it is costly, it is expensive.
Well, and I think too, like, the term trauma therapy isn't even a readily understood term. People might they know what therapy is, or a counselor, or a psychiatrist or whatever, but that whole idea of trauma therapy, I think a lot of people still don't understand it. Celene, could you sort of, just for our viewers, maybe there's people watching that don't even realize that they need it themselves, could you like kind of explain in a nutshell like what it is?
Trauma therapy can be a couple different things. Right now, what I'm doing is it's like an eye stimulation. It's basically going like her. She's going back and forth. Your eye follows, and you just let your mind, like she'll ask you a question, or they'll ask a question about a particular memory that's coming up, and then they'll just ask you to process through that. They'll talk you and let you just process it. Then they'll ask you, what were you feeling? How, what did you imagine? And they just adjust it from there. They'll give you the safe space. So after a while, you have to create your own kind of safe space where you can calm yourself down. And then you get to be reintroduced back into the trauma. But it's essentially allowing your brain to transfer that memory from like one core of your brain to the other core of your brain, where there's a filing system, and that's where it should go. But sometimes it gets stuck. Like these memories get stuck, and they'll just replay and replay, and you're feeling all those emotions. You're feeling all that physical, emotional, and you're reliving it. And you know that's just a memory, but you can't stop your brain from responding, and thus like your like whole body responds to it.
Sure.
So for trauma therapy, it's trying to get you past that point into being able to file it. So if it does come up again, it's like, oh, yes, I remember that. And
Gotcha.
then being able to
And
kind
then,
of return it without it creating so much like physical response. For me, it was a physical response.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, that it sounds extremely painful having to relive so many of those things and process them over and over until it's gosh, we were talking about this a little bit yesterday, but the brain is fascinating.
It
and
is.
how you're able to kind of process things that way, and how you, when you do have memories, it does release different hormones in your body, and you do have those physical responses. And so many people can probably resonate with the fact that they have those reactions to things in their lives, and maybe they never realized that it's something that they needed to address. So
right.
yeah.
Yes. I think it's
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So back at Ransom Church where we used to go, they have a program called Restore. Did you ever have a Restore session?
Josh did. I didn't.
So it's sort of like what you described, but it's completely like integrated with prayer and Jesus and working on memories and how those memories caused emotions and how those emotions were like seeds and how those seeds infiltrated the rest of your life. Super fascinating. I had a Restore session. Gosh, I think I was pregnant. Yeah, I was pregnant with Ariel. So it's been probably 6 years ago now. But I was a little bit scared going into it because I was like, I tend to be the type of person who I like to shut that door.
Yeah, it's done. It's
and
over.
I've moved on. Let's not revisit it,
Yeah.
because I don't want to. So
Right.
I was really nervous when I went to my Restore session. And sure enough, it was some memory. I think the Holy Spirit was already kind of working on me with what was going to be worked on and what needed to be worked on. Sure enough, that was the door that got opened, and it was super hard and super difficult.
Right.
But through it, it was so healing and restoring, because through that, you go back and you relive this memory, right? And you really work through it. But through it all, they talk about, there's a Restore team, and they pray through it, and they have you focus on where Jesus was in it. Through the hard time, through the trauma, through whatever happened, and through focusing on where Jesus was in it, how he, even though that whatever was happening was breaking his heart, he was working so hard to try to make it better, and that he was there with you through it. And it works on forgiveness. It's really cool. It's really fascinating. But anyways, I guess I don't really know where I was going with that.
No,
but
it's cool,
it's super powerful, because now even when like that, those memories kind of pop up, in my brain and in my heart, like I instantly can go back to that restore session and like see where Jesus was, see the forgiveness. And it's really cool too, how it's also working on that seed that infiltrated things in my life, now fixing that seed, and how that healed seed has infiltrated different parts of my life. It's fascinating. It's super cool.
Well, and getting those coping mechanisms that aren't necessarily avoiding the issue are also a very important part of getting help. And, whatever coping mechanisms you might have.
Right.
Some are healthy, some are unhealthy. So it's
I think most of them are unhealthy.
A lot of them are unhealthy. And it is so important to be equipped with the ability to have the good coping mechanisms. And that is such an important part of therapy and finally addressing issues.
Yes. Because our brains are really fascinating. They're delicate, but they're extremely complex. So being able to take good care of them, I think, should be a bigger priority than it tends to be, just because it's within your your body, so it's not something that people see like, ooh, you got like a bruise there. I think that's, for me, that's one of the issues, or that's one of the hiccups that I see sometimes with mental illness is it's easy to disguise it. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard for people to recognize it, even within their own selves sometimes.
Oh, totally.
Mm-hmm. But especially for others, because some people are like, wow, they're just so grumpy today. And it might be just because they're trying to process something that's really hard for them to process, and they're overloaded, like their brain is overloaded. And there's other times they can act really normal because it's really easy to hide it and put on a facade.
Totally.
But yeah,
well, and I think it's so easy for it to tricky. Come out in actions and behaviors that you don't even know why you're doing, you know, whether it's addictions or obsessions or, you know, sometimes you don't even realize the destructive behavior that you have is coming because you have an issue that needed to get worked on, you know?
Yes. Yep. It's interesting because mental health can bleed into so many things. So traumas, different things that have suppressed or you've coped or compartmentalized, however you handle it, end up bleeding into different things. That's exactly it. Like Kathy, you're right. You're wondering, like, why do I feel so upset? Why do I feel triggered by this? Why is this making me have such an emotionally volatile reaction to everything?
Yeah.
And for me, it was just like, I was too fascinated with trying to understand things because I was trying to understand, in a sense, I was trying to understand my dad and just the complexity of him and the things that I had to deal with as a kid, and trying to understand, man, if he would have just gotten help, what would life have been?
What could have been?
Yeah. And so for me, I think it's just kind of become a passion of mine to just talk about it, not be afraid to talk about it with everybody, and to understand and recognize, you know, when my kids are having issues too, like they have, you know, they can have those precursors as well for mental health issues, and just how am I feeding into that for them? And so it's made me a more compassionate and a lot more understanding of where people are at and how people process things. Because even I'm fascinated with how I process trauma, or how my brain has learned to cope and hide and mask and all of that stuff, all of these memories. And for me, it's just incredibly fascinating, but it also makes me more appreciative of the importance of mental health.
Totally.
And learning, like, it's okay not to be okay, because
and like admitting that you're not okay and telling people that you're not okay is okay too.
Right.
You know, it's always that it just comes back sometimes to, how are you doing today? Oh, I'm good. I'm okay.
Yep, I'm fine.
And it's like, you know, you want to know? Do you want to know how I feel today?
Right.
Well, somebody didn't fill the ice cube trays and I started crying. Don't know what that's about. You know, like trying to figure out why you're feeling the feelings you have.
Right.
It's like so important. And like you said, being able to recognize some of those tendencies in your children as well can be completely life-changing. Or even, you know, for me, after I started realizing the issues that I was having and started, you know, accepting help for those, realizing different tendencies in my kids, be like, oh, you know what, Connor was acting, you know, he's crying right now, or he's punching his brother in the face. Like, maybe he's feeling some feelings.
Maybe he's working through something right now.
There's something we need to talk about.
Right.
And I've gotten to the point where I will just kind of sit down alongside my oldest, Liam, who's 9 now, and he can tell me, you know, one day he's just said, I'm really sad because I miss my friends from Mitchell and I haven't made friends in Boise yet. And it's just kind of that thing to where he's like, yeah, I recognize that I've been acting kind of weird lately. This is why. It's cool when they can start doing that, and I hope to keep the lines of communication open there too.
Yes.
Well, that's so important that you do that, and it's so powerful because, you know, when you look at the world and you look at people who tend to get labeled as just they're just trouble, you know, addicts, you know, whatever. Healthy people don't have issues like that. You know, you don't have a healthy person who becomes a drug addict. You just don't. That stuff just stems from past trauma and past hurt and maybe past closed lines of communication, thinking I can't talk to anybody about this. I have to handle this on my own. You know, it's so important that you do that with your kids.
Absolutely.
Good job.
Yeah.
Like it's important, you know, like
great.
if people have, whether, you know, it's something that you can make a change with right now with your own kids, or maybe something that you needed when you were growing up, or your friend that you know is completely messed up needed growing up. Everybody needs that. They need to know that they have a safe person that they can talk to. And it, for me personally, it just breaks my heart even more for the people out there who are really struggling with whatever their hang up or their habit is, because it stemmed from something that they needed help with and they didn't get it, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you're watching the live stream here, Celene, but your sister just commented, Liv, and it's so cool that she's also been accepting help to kind of deal with the past and these. You've got, Celene's from a Catholic family. She's got a lot of siblings. They all work through trauma in different ways, but I'm so glad that Liv has been able to kind of reach out to you and be close to you and work through problems there too. She's a cool person. I miss Liv. I miss playing Torg with you guys. It's a
RPG game.
It's a role-playing game.
It's a role-playing game.
Oh, I was like, I don't know what that language is.
Shout out to Jeff.
Hi, Jeff. Jeff's watching too, and I miss Jeff. Oh my gosh. We had a really great little group in Sioux Falls. We would get together every other Sunday and play. Cool. And it was nice to be able to have that constant interaction with you as well, because you were going through things at that time, and like I liked being able to be there to talk to you. I don't know if that helped at all, but it was.
It did. It helped in more ways than I even realized. Like, I'm glad I had you guys there, and I'm glad we did have those events. Because I always felt like we were like passing ships. I was telling Josh earlier, I'm like, I feel like we were like passing ships who just didn't dock on the same port. And so it was great to kind of dock on the same port for a little bit, especially during that time. Like, that was right around getting ready for the trial and being incredibly frustrated with different things. And just watching you guys experience a whole new beginning and trying to figure out, like, okay, we're like going head deep into church planning, so
yeah, good luck with that. Well, and that is another thing that I know you've got a great support system with some of those people that we were hanging out with, like Jeff and you know, some of your other friends there. How important has the role of community and having those good supporters on your side been for you during your mental health journey?
It's been incredible. It's been, I don't always necessarily look at it for me, but I was looking at it through, you know, my sister Olivia, and my sister-in-law, and just knowing that they loved my family and they were there, and they were, you know, I had my best friend or my good friend, whatever you want to label them. They're like, they're part of my family. It just says this. I have this like large extended family because of the community that I have. Ashley sat down with my sister the day after I got back from trial, and we just sat outside in the hallway. It was like, I think it was Easter Sunday. When we got back the day before that, but Easter Sunday, and she just cried like heavily into Ashley's lap, and Ashley just sat there and like stroked her hair. And we had like friends that came out during that time because I was in worship. During that time we had like some of our worship people out there, and they loved on him. So for me, from that perspective, it was beautiful to see them being able to carry the weight, because for me, I was barely carrying my own weight as it was. I was just numb.
So hard to carry weight for so many people through that process.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
that having that community to kind of distribute some of the burden onto and be embraced by them as well.
Yes. And with the mental health, it really, when you start getting that help, or where you start being open, like for me, it was like, for me, I just have to rip off the Band-Aid. So like, if you really want to know, then you're going to be in it, because there's no turning back once I spill it. But it was really great to have people that were receptive. There's some people that weren't as receptive that I was open with, but at the same time, I was like, well, you wanted to know, and I'm just that type of person that will just rip it right off. But it's not always the case. Everybody's kind of tentative. Everybody has their own approach to it. But for me, I was done being tentative. I was over it. I was over just hiding it. And because I was like, I'm dealing with this and I'm tired of living in the stigma, even if well, kind of lost my train of thought. Even if I was supporting other people who were coming out and being able to talk about their mental health, it's like, yes, but for me, I was like, oh man, I don't know if I could ever do that. And then it just got to a point where I was like, nope, I can, because if I don't advocate, if I don't talk about this, then there's not going to, like, I feel like there's not going to be change. If we don't talk about this, nothing's ever going to change. It's just going to stay the same. It was going to stay this stagnant, like, ooh, this is kind of like something that we talk about hush hush, like deep family conversations and passing. It's not something that's actually actively addressed until something happens, like a death or something else. Like usually it was a death for for my family. But yeah, it's just being able to ask those questions and have people try to be as honest as they can be with it. And allow space for people that do actually want to talk about it. If you're going to ask somebody like how they're actually really feeling, make space and make time.
Actually
make
care
it so
to
that
hear
they
what they say.
Like, sit down with them and be like, no, I really want to know. Like, I know you just said you were okay, but really, how are you? And creating that safe space where they feel like you're actually going to listen. You're not like, oh, hey, how's it going? Oh, okay, well, I gotta go, maybe we'll talk later. Because usually it's like, no, I need to talk now.
It's so hard and it's so scary for people to open up and put themselves out there. So yeah, if somebody does that for you, you need to listen.
You need to be that person.
Yeah, exactly, because they trust you and you know, be that person for them, you know.
Even if you don't feel equipped to be that person, sometimes all they need is someone to just listen and acknowledge that there is something going on. And you know, I don't always have the right words. I wish I did. I wish that was a gifting for me.
That's a scary thing, being a pastor's wife, you know, because so many people look to you, be like, well, they'll know what to say.
And that's the thing too, being a pastor's wife and admitting that you're not okay is another thing that's really hard. Or being someone who's been a leader at your church and admitting that you're not okay. You know, because there are some places where there's still stigma where if you're dealing with this, you're not going to be able to be on a leadership team anymore. You need to go deal with your thing, and then you can come back. And actually being there to talk about it and open up about it and admit that you're getting help is powerful, and that can make so much more of an impact on a person rather than just saying, oh, so and so is not here today because she's dealing with some things.
Right.
It's like, we're unpacking some things, and it's important to talk about it.
And I want to throw this in there before we're done, because I know our time is almost out. But if anybody out there who's watching, like, if you are a person who needs to talk and you don't want to talk to a therapist, or you're scared to, or you can't afford to, or whatever, if you need to talk, reach out to us. I'll listen.
Absolutely.
I might not have the right thing to say, but I'll listen, and I'll try my best. So seriously, if you need that help for anybody out there, like, reach out to somebody that you love and trust. And if you don't have that, reach out to us. We'll be that for you.
Absolutely.
I think it's incredibly important to reach out, because I didn't do a very good job of that, and I ended up sucking as a friend at some point, like just had a friend that was going through something similar, and we just like, I was like, oh, this is like way too much, couldn't handle anything. And but I wasn't advocating for myself and wasn't taking care of myself at that time. So yeah, definitely reach out, even if you feel awkward. Being able to just be like, okay, this is how I feel. What do you recommend, or what? I mean, this is just where I'm at. And sometimes it's just being like, yeah, that does, like, maybe just validating, like, you know what, that does suck.
Yeah,
totally. It's okay to not be okay, and validating that, because a lot of times it's not always validated. Like, you know what, it does suck. It's just like, I could say some other swear words, but I won't. Suck is the best we'll keep alternative.
It PG on this one.
Keeping it PG. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank you so much for opening up, Celene, and being here with us.
You too.
And this is awesome. I just love you. I want you to know that.
Aw, love you too.
All right, everybody.
Talking to you too.
Yeah. And we will definitely, if you need to reach out to us here at Gathering To It, feel free to do that on our Facebook page. Kathy and I are here. Celene is here. I am just so thankful for everybody who could watch tonight, especially Liv and Jeff, because you guys have been right there with Celene through all of this, and you're great people. But yeah, next week, as another heavy hitter, it's our fertility talk. We're going to have Kathy and myself, and Jordan Nelson will be here. Guys, you can watch this one too. I'm just going to say that sometimes it's important for guys to know how to support your partner. Actually, not sometimes, always. Right. It's important for guys to know how to support your partner through these situations. And it's not always just us going through this. It's our husbands too. It's our partners. So feel free to watch next week. Message us with any questions, concerns, comments, and we will see you all next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Celene, that was so good.